What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakian. Super excited to be talking about Civilized to Death. We have Christopher Ryan joining us on the show.
Thanks.
Hi, Chris.
How's it going?
Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Interesting to be here. We're surrounded by technology.
Yeah. Speaking of progress.
Yeah.
Technology is doing a good job in some regards, and technology is civilizing us to death in other regards.
Ain't that the truth?
Ain't that true? So I'm so pumped to have you on to talk about this, and also about your other book that you co-authored, a New York Times bestseller, Sex at Dawn. They kind of have a lot of overlap, and I'm excited to talk about that overlap. For those that don't know, Chris Ryan's background, he's the New York Times bestselling co-author of Sex at Dawn, podcast host of Tangentially Speaking. They've done over 400 episodes now, weekly since 2012. A great podcast. Take a listen. And most recent author of Civilized to Death, The Price of Progress, which takes a contrarian stance that certain aspect of society's progress may actually be analogous to advancing a disease. All right. And you can find all the links in the bio below to the book and his social accounts. He does a really good job on his Instagram of keeping people up to date on his Vanthropology, which is where he...
Anthropology trips. Yeah.
He's in Scarlett Johansson.
So you know it all. Yeah. She's right outside.
She's right outside right now. And you do your podcast on the road as well.
Sure.
Yeah, that's so cool.
We host get-togethers, so people who listen to the podcast can all come and meet each other, and it's all about forming community, right? Which is something I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of prehistory.
Yes. And I want to jump into things actually from a very big picture perspective. This is typically what we really like doing on our show. Let's jump into things from understanding we find ourselves born onto this planet Earth, and we are obsessed right now with this question of trying to influence other people to think about it more. But what is the ultimate nature of reality? Why are we even here in the first place? What created this? Why are we here? And then we can get into all of the other stuff related to Civilized to Death and Sex at Dawn. But what are your thoughts about why are we even here in the first place, and what created this?
That's where we're starting?
Yeah.
All right, I'm normally high when I talk about something like that. What created this and why are we here? Well, I'm not an astrophysicist, so I can't answer, the way Bruce Damer might, of the origins of life and geysers and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really know why we're here, and I don't pretend to know, and I don't know what created us. I think it's quite possible that the explanation is randomness and chaos, and out of chaos comes life. And so I don't know. I think Terence McKenna's theory that that life may be ubiquitous in the universe, but consciousness spreads by way of mushroom spores, for example, and psychedelics. I think that is very interesting to me, because there's life, and then there's conscious life, and I don't see evidence that all life leads to the kind of consciousness that we experience anyway. But then on the other hand, I think an animist perspective on life makes a lot of sense too, that everything is alive, everything is imbued with some sort of spiritual presence. And
yes.
So I don't have any grand theories. I don't claim to be any sort of genius with, maybe that disqualifies me from being on your show, but
no, not at all.
I think there are a few things I feel like I've figured out, a few questions I think I've asked in ways that other people haven't.
Yep.
And but I don't think that, I'm not qualified to comment on grand questions, beyond my own personal experience. I've been thinking about these grand issues maybe more than I had been. My father died about a year ago, And he knew he was dying, and we had some interesting conversations leading up to it. And I remember he asked me what I thought happened after death. And my father was raised Catholic and then lost his faith in college. And then I was born shortly after. And so his, I forget who said this, but someone said, when you're raised in a religious tradition and then you lose your faith, there's a God-shaped hole in your consciousness for the rest of your life. Like this space that God had occupied was now empty, but the consciousness is already formed around it, Anyway, I said to my dad that my feeling about death is that each life is like a raindrop. And that raindrop at the end of its existence lands on the sea. So the raindrop ceases to exist, but the water that it contained merges with this greater whole. And then the cycle continues, and not necessarily that raindrop comes back in some sort of, Buddhist reincarnation sense, but the essence that was contained in the raindrop doesn't cease to exist. And that seemed to give him some comfort. And it gives me some comfort, and that feels right to me. That I feel like the more we learn about life, the more we realize that everything is multifactorial. Everything is essentially beyond comprehension if you really go down and dig into it.
Oh yeah.
There's a grain of truth in every perspective. So it's. Yeah, the more I know, the less I know. That's that kind of thing.
Yeah. The trying to grasp onto this understanding of what is the ultimate nature of reality, even for those that are deeply materialist or evolutionary, just to even get to that initial question of what created the Big Bang, and just trying to scientifically probe at it and also give room for spirituality and mysticism and magic along that journey as well, has been something that I'm just extremely fascinated with and trying to pass along to other people and inspire them. And actually, like, meditation and psychedelics are a crucial component of that as well, understanding the nature of reality.
Yeah.
And even what happens with near-death experiences, what happens after death, what happens before we're born, what are these polarities, what are this interval that seem like our heart potentially takes these 2.5 billion beats of life between life and death, which are so interesting. And so we just kind of like obsessively try and push people into understanding this. Like, do we come here with a purpose or a mission? Do I literally come in adventure into consciousness, into this body for this mission of my consciousness learning these unique experiences that it's learning and contributing value to this physical world that we're endeavoring into? And then do we go and potentially cycle back into the school again at a later time, or go to other schools? And so this is kind of a very indigenous but also spiritual, but also aiming to be more scientifically probed at theme that we talk about a lot. Do you have any thoughts on that last segment that I just riffed on for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the metaphor of the raindrop and how so many religious traditions sort of come to the conclusion that love is the purpose, right? Finding ways to love. And I'm 57 years old now, and I guess you reached out to me. You saw me on Rogan's show very recently, and Joe and I were talking about love, and I said something that he initially misunderstood. What I said was that when I was younger, I thought that love was a very scarce commodity. And the older I get, the more I see that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And he misunderstood me to think that I was talking about dating love, like finding a partner and that kind of thing. And he made the valid point, like, hey, a lot of people, their lives are so structured they don't have time. And it's hard.
You mean love in the literal interconnectedness of the fabric of existence?
That's what I mean.
Yes.
I mean that the older I get, the more I recognize that, and Joe was talking about this as well, that everyone is lovable. Everyone is deserving of love. You see, Joe was saying that since having children, he looks at someone now and he sees the little kid in them. He sees the child they were, which then creates a sense of compassion, because you can't blame the adult if you see the child who suffered so much that he or she got so twisted up into this person who's annoying or aggressive or whatever. Now you see it's ultimately nothing is anyone's fault. It's which has radical implications for like the prison industrial complex and criminal law and all that.
You can literally look at another human being and you can see if they're, let's say, around 30 days old or so, you can literally see their almost 10,000 days of life that they've lived up to that point. And then when you really do that, then you get this love at a deeper level, because you get what are all of these influences and stimuli that have affected this person's development that has then made it so that maybe their personality, their traumas, their treasures, their unique gifts that they're bringing to the world, what they're passionate about, their parents and their ancestral lineage.
That's it. It could even go previous to their lives. We know now that there are epigenetic alterations that come from several generations back. If your grandparents or great-grandparents suffered from a famine, you're more likely to be obese. I mean, it's very, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out now. I think that in terms of what you were riffing on there and this question of love, again, I think about the raindrops, right? Here we are, we're these individual raindrops falling from the sky in the course of our lives, feeling this separation. And yet the ultimate truth that everyone seems to arrive at is that we are all one, right? We're all the same. And that's the sea that we all came from and that we all end up in, right? So maybe there's this memory of the unity of where we are between lives, right? That we're trying to wake up to. It's like this dream. We're in a dream, and the reality is when we're all one.
So a lot of people, especially when we talk about spirituality or we talk about psychedelics or meditation, a lot of people talk about this drop that is able to rejoin the ocean. That's like a really frequent theme that comes up. And I think a really good way to put it that you're beginning to make it more and more evident is that it could be that we come from the ocean of the clouds in the water cycle perspective, go into these individual raindrops at endeavoring into these bodies of consciousness, and then throughout that process we have the ability to do meditation or psychedelics or deep spiritual experiences or even deeply scientific experiences which take us out of our individual raindrops and kind of merge us into that feeling of the interconnectedness. But then the idea is that as you hit the ocean, that is the rejoining process, and then potentially the water cycle continues. It's a very interesting way to put it.
So love is both a yearning for and a memory of and an experience of that unification that you might experience with individual other raindrops. But what it's really about is that water all flows into one and is liquid. And this is a temporary state that we're in now. And that's a very important theme. I don't want to push you anywhere you don't want to go yet.
Go ahead.
But it's a very important theme in this book, actually, and in Sex at Dawn, honestly.
I was about to bring this up. Let's see if we were maybe going into the same place.
Well, this idea that community is so deeply important to our species, a sense of being embedded in a community of loving, mutually respecting people who are looking out for each other is so important to the survival of our species. And yet here we are in the 21st century, more people living alone than ever before. The sort of social structure that we're living within is separating us and wants us all to have our individual spaces because it wants us to spend as much money as possible on, everyone has to have their own washer and dryer and vacuum cleaner and cars and television. You can't get together and share it. There are literally zoning laws prohibiting more than one family from living in a house, even if it's a 15-bedroom house. It's so that the world that we've created runs so much counter to our nature. Exactly. So that's what this book is about. It's like, why have we how have we ended up in a world
Yes.
that's so hostile to our deepest needs and appetites?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what are the forces behind that quote unquote progress? And what are the really, when you follow things like the money and when you follow things like people's spirit, like what is really within the further propagation of the protocols that are making it less community oriented, more robotic and AI driven? Why?
Yeah.
Why? Let's hit this from another perspective, and then we're going to get into all this. It was kind of cool seeing it from when you were teaching about it again. I was seeing it like the raindrops have their beautiful individual relationships to other raindrops, which actually, usually people find themselves closest in terms of love to their mom, dad, brother, sisters, their partner, their spouse, right, their children, these types of things, your really closest friends, right, this type of stuff. And so you have to have spokes to all these other raindrops, like nodes, to all those other, to the spokes to those other nodes. And when you do, your wheel can roll. But if any of these spokes are degraded, then your wheel can't roll through life as easily. And so that's a crucial aspect to these relationships. And then also just let's go to, hunter-gatherer days is such a crucial aspect of your worldview. And you I actually love how you went to this super duper abstract way of trying to reconcile what we used to do as hunter-gatherers and our anthropological, archaeological lineages that lead us, psychosexual lineages that lead us to our modern day, and trying to see how specific aspects of what we used to do versus what we do now. And I think a good way to put this, because many viewers are quite aware of this aspect, it's just we have people like Steven Pinker that wrote Better Angels of Our Nature, which it just feels like, Neil deGrasse Tyson now and all these other people have just been telling me every time I've been trying to probe at certain aspects of that statement that are, Michael Shermer's been another one that we've had on the show that he's the ultimate skeptic. And we try and poke at how can you just blanketly say that 100% of absolutely everything about life today is better than it was even 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000, 100,000 years ago? There's just a very ignorant, I think, way to view it. It's a little too
it's faith-based.
Yeah.
That's what I find ironic about it, that it's, there's a section in the book here where I place Richard Dawkins in a pulpit, because so much of his thinking, as I read it, is faith-based. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And I think that's true of Steven Pinker, of Matt Ridley, and I call them the Neo-Hobbesians, who begin with the assumption that life is getting better and has always gotten better, with fits and starts and minor setbacks here and there, but in general the trend has always been better, better, better. And I take apart The Rational Optimist, which is a book written by Matt Ridley, which basically makes that argument. That's explicitly the argument of the book. And it's incredible when you see the twists that they put themselves in to make this argument. So Matt Ridley says, right at the beginning of the book, where he's saying, look, life is clearly getting better. First of all, we went from a species with 50,000, 100,000 individuals to 7 billion. I mean, come on, that's progress. And I'm
population is
how is having more of us better for us? It might be better for some other superorganism that, you know, but
some
how
people
is it?
argue the creativity, the meaning, the amount of interconnectedness can get expressed. It's some aspects
Sure,
of it.
and those are interesting arguments to make, and then I would have responses to each of those arguments. But the idea that more of a species makes it a more successful species is only relevant in a very limited biological sense. That the DNA of that species is spreading in that sense, that's success. But that says nothing about the experience of individuals within that species.
And also the 10 million total species, and how chickens and pigs and cows are just getting slaughtered.
Right. But there are more of them, so they must be better off.
So this would be maybe a good way to maybe try and quantify it, would be like, for the humans at least, out of the 8 billion of us today, if you could have maybe a score for their overall health and wellness and prosperity, their overall score of 1 to 100, let's say, would the then average of the 1 million people that used to live 100,000 years ago, would the average collective score be 65 or 85, or today would it be 65 or 85? Where do those scores rank?
Yeah, I think I don't claim to be able to answer that question definitively, but I think that it's a very
important question.
It's an important question, which is dismissed by the faith-based crowd. It's a relevant question, and it's a complicated question. For example, in the last 10 days, I saw a report from UNICEF that said 1 of 3 children alive in the world today is malnourished. 1 in 3.
So like 2.5 billion children are malnourished. That's a lot.
A lot of kids.
Yeah.
If we've been having progress for thousands of years since the advent of civilization, 5, 7, 10,000 years, whatever your measure is, this is as far as we've gotten. 1 out of 3 kids is malnourished to the point where their bodies aren't developing, their brains aren't developing properly. That's insane. There's no way that we've been progressing. And if you look at hunter-gatherer kids, what you find is very little malnourishment, almost no malnourishment. And I quote, primary sources with the Hadza in Africa and tribes in the Amazon, anthropologists that went specifically to look at the health of children, and they find these kids are great. No parasites, no even older people, no heart disease, no diabetes, none of this stuff. Now, I'm not whitewashing hunter-gatherer existence. A lot of kids die.
Yeah.
They die.
The child mortality rate is very high. Actually, you bring up the statistic, which I think is really interesting quickly to mention, is that a lot of people just say, oh, we used to live 30 years, 35 years used to be the average life expectancy. Now you're living 75. So yeah, progress.
We've doubled the human lifespan.
Doubled the human lifespan is the argument. But then this is such a fascinating idea, is that took into account child mortality rates, which were significantly higher. So you would average in someone that dies at 1 with someone that dies at 70, which is why that number seems so low.
Right.
Compared to today. But really, if we can look back at anthropological and archaeological records, could it be that a lot of people that were healthy were living until they were 70, just like they are today?
Definitively. There's no question about it. So a human being has never been old at 35. Except maybe Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know. But human beings... Sorry, if he's a listener or watcher, I don't know. But no... Human beings, Homo sapiens, our average lifespan beyond childhood, or let's say our modal lifespan, the number of years at which your body starts to break down, and if you don't die from one thing, you're going to die from something else, is between 70 and 80. Mm-hmm. That's natural to us. Chimpanzees live typically into their 50s, as do bonobos. So the idea...
And that's been a pretty constant. Chimpanzees, bonobos living about 50 since the dawn of time.
Right.
Interesting. Right. So they haven't really had a life expectancy uptick. So we basically need really true radical life longevity with things like taking our 15-year-old homeostatic capacity, our body's ability to get back to equilibrium, and we need to have that when we're 25 and 35 and 45 in order for our body to constantly be able to combat against pathology developing in order for us to uptick ourselves up to 120 or 160 in terms of life expectancy, which then make it so that now we're talking real longevity increases.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical. I know you've had Aubrey
Gray on the show. Yeah.
I'm very skeptical of that whole Silicon Valley movement toward eternal life. I think that's a bunch of bullshit, honestly. But I mean, just to finish this point here.
Ahead, yeah.
So what people are led to believe, and I taught in medical schools in Spain where my students believed that, and I quote doctors from UCSF, like very elite institution, a doctor there saying, well, the reason that people have chronic back problems is that the human body wasn't designed to last this long. People died in their mid-30s in prehistory, and so so people, educated clinicians who are working with these issues, believe that the human body was not designed to last beyond 40. That's not true. That is factually incorrect. And no one who understands this data is confused about this. This is archaeologists, anthropologists, they all understand this. But when it comes into popular culture, it's a very powerful idea because it feels good.
Oh yeah, we've done so well. We've doubled our lifespan. Yeah.
So whatever problems you have, you're not happy at work, you feel like your life is slipping away from you, you don't have any friends, your body's all messed up because of this shitty food that you're eating. Look, you're living twice as long, right? So stop your complaining.
It's a sales pitch to get people to stop complaining.
That's what it is.
You're depressed because you feel like a dopamine monkey behind your cell phone.
Right.
Stop complaining. You're living twice as long.
You're living twice as long. So, my point, once I established that this is a statistically misleading factoid, I say, if you're going to count child mortality in your average, let's count abortion. Abortion doesn't enter into our average lifespan calculations. Why not? Right? And this is no commentary on the ethical arguments around abortion. I'm just saying a lot of the kids who died in prehistory before one, a lot of the skeletons that appear in these archaeological finds were children who were unhealthy, who had birth defects. And hunter-gatherers would have let them die. What do? We detect them in prenatal testing and abort them. So why isn't that a relative or a relevant factor in our calculation?
So we've been practicing eugenics in some sorts for the longest time.
And
we want to breed
hundreds of millions of babies are aborted around the world.
Is that the number every year?
Yeah, the number's in the book. I don't remember.
Hundreds of millions.
China and India.
Damn.
Girls are aborted. Healthy female fetuses are aborted regularly. In China, because of the one-child policy, and everyone wants to have a son, so now we've got hundreds of millions of boys without, girls.
Partners,
And in India, just because of cultural bias against girls and toward boys.
One-child policy did just end. Yeah.
So anyway, the real relevance of that argument is, I would say, twofold. One is just I want people to understand, no, hunter-gatherers live into their 70s. And this notion that we've doubled the human lifespan is bogus. And much of the actual extension in our lives, and relating back to my father, is not in livable life. It's we die more slowly. So it's like basketball games. You watch this basketball game, it's dramatic, it goes back and forth, it's really exciting. And then in the final minute and a half, it takes half an hour because of the timeouts, another TV commercial. They know they've got your attention. You're not going to change the channel. You want to see who wins. And the whole meaning of the game is in the last minute and a half, 2 minutes, and it takes half an hour. It ruins the drama, ruins the experience of the game. That's what we've done with our lives. We've got a medical profession that is operating under the assumption that death is the enemy to be fought constantly at any cost in human suffering and in material sense. It's absurd. It's absurd. And, I had to actually call my father's doctor and say, what are you doing? The guy's 79 years old. He's got kidney disease. He's got heart disease. He's on his way out, and you're ordering more tests. Yeah. You're ordering more therapies. Yeah. You're sending him around the city to get all these treatments. Let the dude die. Right? I know he's got great insurance, and I know you're getting a lot of money out of that, but enough, right? You're torturing him for money for no reason. And I think a lot of people are facing that kind of situation in the United States. In other countries, it's different, but in the United States,
that palliative care perspective is actually really important. We had Jess Sitter on the show, and she was talking about these end of life conversations that we need to have with our loved ones. Where what if I literally just don't want to go through that process, like you're indicating about your father? Maybe I do want to just go out to the ocean or to the forest, and I want that experience with a couple people that are close to me as I pass. Right. And like to have these so-called, like, that sounds way more like hunter-gatherer-esque, and that sounds way less like corporate metropolis transactional-esque. And so, and also, we need to hit this point. This point's so important. You mentioned this, and I think this is, again, just such a crucial aspect to the conversation, which is this idea that, like, we're being, in a sense, propaganda's coming down our throats all the time about this is the best time to live, period, shut up, you have all of the best things now. And it just basically takes us away from observing how it could have been better, that what are the better aspects of how hunter-gatherers lived. And before we get to this idea of like, okay, these aspects are better, which you're already talking about, but that these aspects were better, these aspects are worse about today, we can bring some of these aspects from what we were doing in the past, and we can actually implement them into what we are doing today to make life better. One of the things you brought up was community already, right? But especially as we build these AIs and we build the robotic age and the biotech and neurotech age and the VR age and all these quantum computing ages that we're building, it can actually be extremely beneficial for us to fish back and find the interconnectedness of everything, fish back and find our connection to nature, fish back and find our connection to each other and to community, and just embed ethics and morals and philosophy and spirituality in the technologies that we're building of tomorrow that are treating humans like they're obsolete, and instead treat humans like the divine beings that they are.
Yeah, I wonder if that's possible, though. I wonder, like in your construction, we're building the technologies. I kind of feel like the technologies are building us. I feel like, like Michael Pollan makes this point in one of his books that, you could say that humans have used wheat, and there's wheat all over the world because it's useful to humans, but you could also look at it and say, no, wheat has used humans to spread itself. Getting back to this question of, is the absolute number of a species a measure of its progress? If so, wheat has been incredibly successful.
And something even older than that is our microbiome.
Sure. Yeah. So there are these questions of who's using whom and what's happening here.
It's all so interconnected like that, of who's using who like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole section of this book that I ended up taking out, mostly because my editor was like, dude, that's a whole different book. You can't just slip this in here. But I got to the point where I'm making the argument like, okay, civilization actually on aggregate, in my opinion, is not an improvement in human life. Like you were talking about earlier, if we assign sort of a human life satisfaction score, the average around the world right now would probably be pretty low, whereas in hunter-gatherer times, the average was pretty high. You talk to any case where the hunter-gatherers are offered the opportunity to join civilization, they flee. I tell a story about Darwin, and on the ship there were these three people who had been brought to England and met the Queen and saw how civilized people lived, and the idea was they were taking them back to Tierra del Fuego, and they would put them there with a house and a garden, and they would tell the native people, like, no, we should be nice to those British people because they've got the greatest life. They really know how to live. And instead, they abandoned the house, abandoned the gardens, and just fled back and lived the way they had. And they got gemmy buttons when Darwin and the crew were back there. They found this guy and they brought him on the ship, and he'd lived in England for a year or two. He spoke English, and Darwin wrote in his journal that he was very pleased to see that at least he still remembered how to use a knife and spoon and fork and all that. And they said to him, like, why did you abandon the gardens and the huts we built and all this stuff? And they offered to take him back to England. If you want to come, you can come with us to England. He said, no, man, there are plenty birdies, plenty fishies. He's like, why do you guys want me to work? I don't understand. Or the guy in the Kalahari the Kung San man who said, why should I learn to farm when there are so many mongo nuts in the world? Like, hunter-gatherers look at the world and they say, I got everything I need here. This is fine. I'm happy. We're good. It's the civilization, people from civilization who want to impose, who insist. It's like, white man's burden. We have to go and civilize them. We have to show them this is the way to live. You have to live this way. God won't forgive you for being a heathen. You have to join us. That's the insistence, right? It's not coming in the other way. The other way, they're like, hey, we're good. You do what you do. Just leave us alone, right? So it's a very interesting sort of flip where these Neo-Hobbesians and then go back in time, the missionaries and, all the sort of explorers, they're all out there pushing this way of life that they think is superior, so clearly superior. And yet you have to literally kill people, destroy their culture in order for them to submit to this way of life that's so superior. It doesn't make any sense logically. I quote from Darwin's letters that he wrote back to the King and Queen of Spain on his first voyage to Hispaniola, and he writes about how amazing the people are. He says they're beautiful, they're healthy, there's food and fish everywhere, all the trees have fruit. It's like they live in paradise. In fact, some historians have argued that the word Indian doesn't come from the idea that Columbus thought he was in India. It comes from the fact that in these letters he said, seguramente es gente que viven en Dios.
In Dios.
In Dios, right.
In God.
In God, exactly,
Wow,
right.
yeah.
In paradise, in
paradise,
heaven, right?
Because they had so much abundance.
They had abundance. They were happy. They were generous. If you express admiration, he says this, if you express admiration for any possession, they immediately give it to you. They're ignorant of war. He says they're I forget the phrase, but they're the most beautiful people in the world. And then the next sentence he says, with 50 men I could subjugate them all.
Yeah.
So who's living the superior life there, right? Who's got the better approach? What if Columbus and his men had just been like, you know what, the hell with Spain, we're staying here, which happened many times actually in the course of history. The mutiny on the Bounty was an example of that, where the men on the ship mutinied because they wanted to stay on that island rather than go back to England and continue their miserable lives on that ship. Yeah. So there are many historical examples of this sort of thing, some of which I cite in the book here. I don't remember what your question was.
What a big picture perspective on this big board game. We like thinking about it like a big game of Sims or a big game of Risk and Monopoly that we're all embedded in. And in that sense, it's like, you're sending out the ships because in many ways, are you going out with a big loving heart to try and go and trade with other people around the world and learn about who they are and see what they've creatively made? Or are you going there to literally push your religion and dogmas and try and just pillage their resources and try and take over their land with your army and, you know, do the little risk movement where you get your color on their land. And I think that, you know, sometimes, like you indicated, they come and they see that, wow, is it really this beautifully interconnected with nature, their lives, and so much abundance and so much prosperity that maybe we should just stay here? And and then I think this also is really important to mention, is just that a lot of people will say, well, don't be so in love with the past, because there were aspects of the past that weren't so pretty as well. And I think that's also very true and very important. Although you do disprove some of those things. You say that all the people that say that there are issues with dental hygiene, that dental hygiene wasn't an issue in the hunter-gatherer days. It only became an issue when we started eating grains in our agricultural domestication agrarian days, and that and so there's things like that. But there's also, like, in a sense, it one day something did happen where it was Alan has this stuff and claims it's his stuff, and Chris has this stuff and claims it's his stuff. And then I'm like, well, why does Chris have more stuff than me? And why is his wife prettier? And why does he have a bigger cave? Bop on the head. And so there was that as well. So there's like that, but it's compared to also this beautiful interconnectedness. So,
yeah, but also let's look at that a little closer, because in terms of the metaphor that you're using, Chris has more stuff than me. So we're talking about culture with accumulated resources. Hunter-gatherers don't have accumulated resources.
They're nomadic and moving to the spot,
exactly,
harvesting, and then just taking what they need,
what they find, and they use it. It's the technical term is immediate return hunter-gatherers. So immediate return. So they find fruit, they eat it. Right? They kill something, they eat it. And then they move on the next day.
There's no fridge.
There's no fridge. They're not. Now there's
no grain like agriculture.
There's no grain, and a more relevant example would be the Pacific Northwest people who had massive salmon runs seasonally, and they learned to smoke salmon. And so they would harvest the salmon during the salmon run, smoke it, and then they would have that in the winter to eat. Now what happens, so that's sort of like an agricultural society.
Was there some overfishing that occurred then?
Not the overfishing, but they became hierarchical, warlike. Women became very low status. They had slavery. So they essentially became like agricultural societies. So it's the accumulated resources that triggers this political change and the change in the relationships between men and women and other human beings, because now you have possessions. When you have possessions, you need to decide who gets to keep them, who gets to distribute them, who protects them, so you get these political hierarchies that develop very quickly.
Damn, so that's the trigger moment, is, as you start smoking the salmon and you're able to store it longer, then it's like, well, why does he have 6 salmons and I only have 1 over the winter?
Exactly.
And so that's so interesting. So as soon as there's like possessions, one more time, was immediate return hunter-gathering.
And these others in the Pacific Northwest are technically referred to as complex hunter-gatherers. But they're not really hunter-gatherers. That's the thing. So and this is, you mentioned Steven Pinker earlier. He plays with this stuff. There's immediate return hunter-gatherers, which is what our ancestors were, right? There may have been some complex hunter-gatherers in some parts of the world, but they would have been limited to areas with a salmon run or something like that, right? And we're presuming they learned how to smoke salmon and preserve it. No one really knows for sure. So you got immediate return, complex. Then you have horticulturalists who have, they hunt and fish, but they also have gardens, domesticated animals, pigs normally, and like in Papua New Guinea. And they build static settlements. So they build a long house, or they build buildings that are meant to be there for a long time. It's not a teepee or a wigwam or something that you stay in a night or two and then either break down and take with you or just abandon. Now, the complex hunter-gatherers and the horticulturalists they have resources. They have accumulated resources.
Yep.
You've got pigs, you've got a building, you've got gardens. So you've got something worth fighting over.
So hierarchies form. You can see the evolution of a hierarchy starting as resources accumulate.
That's it. A hierarchy forms in response to the presence of accumulated resources.
That's so interesting.
Right. So then when you get into these discussions of whether or not war was ubiquitous in prehistory, which Steven Pinker and Richard Dawkins and Michael Shermer are very sort of adamant about. My question to them is, why do you think people were risking their lives to fight when there was nothing worth fighting over? There were no resources. So I understand if you've got a garden and you've got pigs and, over in our valley, the rains don't come. And so there's not enough to eat. The trees aren't fruiting. We might come over and raid your village to get some of those pigs. We're starving. Of course we are, right? But if you don't have any pigs, if you're like us and you're just moving around doing the best immediate return, there's nothing to get from you. Right?
You have nothing except maybe some of these other. Maybe you found a couple pieces of gold somewhere, or you found a couple.
But gold is of no value to hunter-gatherers. That's a civilizational thing.
Maybe you found some sort of a better weapon that can kill the animal that you're looking to hunt.
You have some obsidian or something.
Obsidian. So there may be something that they have even in an immediate return hierarchy that makes it so that people would want to commit violence. Maybe.
I don't think so.
Sounds much less possible than what you indicate, which is that as soon as you have you called it, what were the next ones?
Horticultural society.
Horticultural societies. Right. So that creates then the smoked salmon example is great, or also the just the accumulation of resources at all begins that process.
There's something worth fighting over. And remember, hunter-gatherers are all armed. They're all armed.
All are armed.
And they know how to use those weapons, right? They hunt. So it's very risky to attack a group of hunter-gatherers. They're very alert. They're armed. They're very fit. They're going to chase you down. They're going to shoot you. It's not a low-risk proposition.
These are not, like we call today, keyboard warriors.
Right. Yeah. These aren't a bunch of angry dudes on Twitter. No. These are badass dudes.
Yeah.
So, So anyway, that's an interesting sort of argument about war.
I would love for everything that you just said that is challenging the current zeitgeist around what Pinker, Dawkins, Shermer, etc. are propagating. I would love for that to be a discussion that's actually had. I would love to see that on a show like ours or on Rogan's show or wherever it ends up being, but I would love to have, and I think Shermer actually had it also with remind me again, Gobekli Tepe, who was the author again of the now
Graham Hancock.
Graham Hancock. Thank you for getting that one for me. That Shermer had it with Graham Hancock at least on the program.
Oh, on Rogan's show.
On Rogan's show. Yeah. So those two got the chance to go back and forth. Graham and Shermer.
And I've had Michael Shermer on my podcast twice, I think.
Yeah.
And I will be on his in the next couple of weeks.
Great.
And he's already, I actually warned him. I was like, dude, you might not have had a chance to read Civilized to Death, but I definitely take some shots at Pinker and Dawkins, and I know you're friends with them, so, heads up.
But in a friendly way. This isn't shots like we're trying to be commit harm against each other. It's just literally like we want to settle the world views. The world views in the sense are like, hey, we want to get to the truth. Everyone's trying to get to the truth. And if we can write out these core points about what you're saying the truth is, what we think it is, and then just see how those can interplay and find some sort of a really cohesive thing where they can give examples and say, actually, hunter-gatherers behaved in this way, and you can go, they behaved in that way. I think that can be really helpful, but just the discourse needs to happen rather than, again, it just seems like it's a dogmatic, faith-based idea in progress that all progress, 100%, not even 99.9%, 100% of everything that's happened until today has been exceptional, and all the progress. And so it does definitely, like we were saying, if you look back and see the interconnectedness, the respect to nature, the one thing, and try and embed that in what we're doing in the future. But one thing that I do really have to mention with you that I thought so also fascinating, I was recently hanging out with one of my friends, Mish, and she has a chicken coop, and she has chickens. And she was teaching me about chicken hierarchies, which are ridiculously fascinating. Pecking orders. Wow. And so she goes, the roosters are pretty serious regarding like getting into the sex with hens, and I was like, okay, well, tell me more. And she goes, well, sometimes when two roosters have both contributed to the hen, contributed as in semen to the hen, that the hen will birth, the chicken that will birth from the hen will literally have visible genetic traits from both roosters. And that blew my fucking mind. Because you list this tribe in the Amazon.
Lots of them.
Lots of tribes in the Amazon and around the world that, again, we have this, again, let me put this into perspective. We have this very purist idea where I know people of specific nationalities, even my own nationality, which is like Armenian, and where my literally family friends will say things like, I will not have sex with a woman that has had sex with anyone else. She has to be a virgin. She has to be 100% Armenian, and then and only then will I have a child with her because she is pure. And I know that my seed is going to be 100% Armenian. And I'm like, damn, that is some straight up crazy cultural lineage shit that is. And versus like these tribes in the Amazon, or like with these chicken examples, is that a woman can go and find the smartest guy, the strongest guy, the funniest guy, and have sex with all of them in a short period of time. And then the child can basically potentially be 33 1/3% from all three of those dads. And all three of them feel like they need to. What an insane difference from monogamy.
Anthropologists refer to that as partible paternity.
Partible paternity.
And it's seen in at least half a dozen tribes in the Amazon that have no connection with one another, no trading or common language or anything. So it's clear that it has arisen in different parts of the world, also Papua New Guinea, and there are indications in other parts of the world as well. So it appears to be sort of a natural conclusion. People didn't understand. Darwin didn't understand that one sperm cell was sufficient to impregnate a woman. So that's a relatively recent understanding. So why would you make that connection? If women are generally having sex and getting pregnant, why would you conclude that the sex made them pregnant? It rains a lot and women get pregnant. You don't say rain causes pregnancy, right? And we talked about in Sex at Dawn, we talked about parts of the world where there's the belief that if a woman steps over a smoky fire, that'll get her pregnant, or that the ancestral spirits just come down and inhabit a woman. And so in the partible paternity case, they believe that women are partly pregnant when they begins to menstruate, and that's an indication that there's a person possibly forming in there, but they sort of reach a tipping point when a critical mass of semen is accumulated. So she has to have a certain amount of sex with men, and then the semen literally congeals into a fetus.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's why the essence of the different men that she's had sex with become materially and spiritually part of that child. So when the child's born, all the men who've had sex with her will feel a paternal connection to that to that baby. And the overarching
Cooperative breeding was the other one. Partible, paternity, cooperative breeding.
Yeah.
What an interesting
and cooperative raising of children too.
Think about then the child gets the really strong dad, the really smart dad, the really funny dad to raise, help, and they get to do that for all the communal raising
because that's not the only woman that those guys have been having sex with. So there's this, the overarching argument of sex at dawn is that our ancestors survived by cooperating with one another, right? And this gets us back to the raindrops and the love and the unity and all these things. We know, without question, immediate return hunter-gatherer societies are organized around the principle of sharing and cooperation. Now, for people who say, here we go with the Rousseauian, noble savage stuff, I want to make it very clear that what anthropologists have demonstrated is not that hunter-gatherers are more noble than we are in some sense. It's that sharing enabled them to survive.
Yeah.
It was simply the most practical approach to organizing a hunter-gatherer society.
Yes.
And hunter-gatherer societies constitute well more than 95% of our existence, of our time in existence as a species. I'm talking about anatomically modern human beings. I'm not even getting into, previous versions of Homo sapiens.
Yeah, we're talking out of the last 200,000 years, only 10,000 was agriculture.
And now that, since Sex at Dawn was published, that estimate's gone to 300,000. There have been discoveries in North Africa that seem to indicate that anatomically modern humans existed 300,000 years ago. So, 10,000 years out of 300,000, and that's, in the Fertile Crescent. That's not in most parts of the world where civilization came later. We're talking about, if you want to understand your dog, you look at wolves and coyotes, right? That's the essence. Even though your dog might be a poodle or a pug, its essence is a carnivore. It's a canid. And so that's what you want to study. If you want to understand us, you study hunter-gatherers. That's what we are.
Study your lineage, study the past in order to understand who you are and where you can optimally go.
And you want to understand what kind of life is going to be satisfying and meaningful for this creature.
Yes.
I use the zoo metaphor in the book where, we are going to live in a zoo. As you were saying, what are we going to do in the future? How are we going to design our world so that it'll be more healthy and satisfying for us as a species? Well, we need to understand the world in which we evolved.
Yes.
Right? Just like if you're designing a zoo, you want to design the enclosure to replicate as much as possible the natural environment of that animal so that it won't die or, become suicidal or insane. Zoochosis is a term used by zoo designers and workers for animals that are so out of place they lose their minds, right? So do we want to live in the Calcutta Zoo, which is just a bunch of concrete boxes, or do we want to live in the San Diego Zoo that's designed around an understanding of the species? We design the zoos that we live in.
We do.
So
our cities,
our office buildings, the way we design corporations, the way we design hierarchies, the way we practice politics, the food that we eat, right? All of this is the result of choices that we make, and if we make those choices informed by the sort of animal that we actually are, not the propaganda that we're hearing telling us everything's great, everything's better than it's ever been, don't look back, that's the zookeeper telling the animal in the cage to just shut up and be happy. You're lucky you're protected by your cage.
Stay heads down and keep building the prison walls that are the metropolises, that are the zoo cages that are not as efficiently built as they could potentially be. And I really like that analogy a lot. The zoo analogy is really good because we are the designers of the built environment that we have the opportunity to put ourselves in. And if we took that really reflective step that needs to be taken to see where we came from and how we could add these first principled methods of living with nature harmoniously, with the interconnected fabric of each other at a deeper level, with more community, with more love, with more sharing, with all these different things. And if we embed that going forward, our cities would look completely different. Our hierarchies would look completely different. Our politics and our economics would look completely different. Yeah. And one of those things is this idea of inclusive stakeholding. That's something that is looking like more and more is the direction of where we're going. We are no longer looking at things from actually, this is really applicable to hunter-gatherers too, is just that it used to be that I would tell you a story because it would benefit our collective genetic fitness for me to tell you that story about what to eat, what not to eat, about how to hunt, about how to love, how to be funny, how to be strong, etc. Now stories are propaganda for self-dealing habits. I will tell you a story so that you buy my shit. And my shit isn't always conducive to your genetic fitness. You
like this big picture view. So
yes,
I'll talk about you with something that I don't normally talk about in interviews because it's too far out. Remember I said earlier there was a part of the book I had to pull out because the editor said, no, that's a totally different book.
Yeah.
It was examining this question of why is civilization so powerful if it's actually not improving the quality of life for the average human being. And as I investigated that question, I started to see evidence. You mentioned the microbiome earlier, right? So there's like a sort of a hierarchy of life. You have single-celled organisms. Bruce Damer's spoken about how they may have arisen, converting solar energy into biological energy. Then you have multicellular organisms. Then you might have groups of multicellular organisms that function in some way collectively, and so on and so on. And it increases in complexity. And at the pinnacle of complexity, we place ourselves because that's the way humans tend to do things. And so here we are at the pinnacle of complexity. Each stage of life is composed of simpler stages of life, right? But here we are, we contain billions of cells in our guts and on our skin and in our blood and in the liquid over our eyeballs, and all these cells are organisms that don't even share our DNA. So each of us, we act as if we're individuals, but each of us is in fact a complex system with billions of interacting organisms.
Yeah.
Each of us is a city, right?
Yes.
Why do we think it stops there? Why do we think that that's the end of it? Starts with single cell and it ends with humans. That seems unlikely to me. So my question was, okay, what are we embedded within? What other life form are we part of that we're unaware of, just like these organisms within us have no idea that there's somebody driving to Starbucks to get a coffee, right?
Yes.
And I came to the conclusion that institutions, and more broadly civilization itself, is an organism. It's an emergent intelligence within which we're embedded. Yes. So, one example I often
seeing
use,
it as the whole planet itself is the 8 billion human cells, but it's also all of the other 10 million species that are on the planet, and then they act as nodes as well. But the whole Earth orbiting this star is a cell in the universe.
Right. I mean, the sort of Gaia hypothesis. Yes. There's a beautiful book called Lives of a Cell by Lewis Thomas that's like one of the classics of scientific literature from the 70s, where he really gets into this notion. But I'm thinking of it more as, I mean, yes, that's certainly true. But for example, I was thinking, I was talking with someone about this and about Exxon, and I co-host and co-created this thing called the Motherfucker Awards that happens in LA. This will be the second year, December 3rd. And the idea is to celebrate the corporations that have done the best work fucking Mother Earth. So, right?
Oh my
and comedians accept the rewards on awards on behalf of the corporations. So we have these, great LA-based comedians who go up and accept the award.
Oh, so it's for humorously to awaken people to corruption and to environmental pollution.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Right. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's trying to laugh at the dire state that we're in, trying to bring comedy to it, but bring awareness to these things that are happening, right? Anyway, I was talking with somebody in that context, and they said, Chris, the thing is, like, good people work at these companies. Like, there are good people working at Exxon, and you're demonizing them. And I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about Exxon as an entity, right? Or DuPont or Monsanto or whatever it is. And the thing is, Exxon is a living thing. So if the head of Exxon, if the CEO of Exxon goes down to Peru with his son and does some ayahuasca and has an epiphany and suddenly sees the world as you and I do and realizes what's going on and what his role in that has been. And he goes back to headquarters and has a meeting on Monday morning saying, gentlemen, we need to stop this. We can't do this deep water drilling. We can't be on the North Slope. We have no idea what we're doing. We can't protect the planet. What's going to happen? He's out. He's out before lunch. And what if the board of directors happens to agree with him? They're out.
What if the whole company goes and does ayahuasca?
Exactly. Yeah. What would happen? Yeah. They would all be fired and other people would replace them because people don't run companies. Companies run people. That's my point. Civilization does not serve us. We serve civilization. There's something going on here on a macro level that we're barely able to perceive.
We're crickets trying to imagine the big game.
Yeah, or another analogy would be termites. Every termite's doing something that seems to make sense to him, and somehow this giant termite mound is built.
Yes.
Right? Salmon schooling, birds flocking. Nobody knows what's happening. It just happened.
It seems like as Elon said, a biological bootloader for digital superintelligence.
Well, that's one of the possibilities that I'm not real happy about, but certainly it feels as if we may be a larval stage for another life form that's emerging out of us, that's sort of a merging of technology and biology. We already see it. With the artificial hips and the pacemakers and the LASIK surgery and the implanted lenses and the Google glasses and, all this staring at our phones. We've, externalized a lot of our brain functioning. It seems to be going in that direction. And that doesn't bode well for us because that life form doesn't need clean oceans or fisheries or coral reefs or any of the other things that we value as human beings. So at the end of Civilized to Death, I sort of go down, I look at three potential futures, and that's one of them. If we keep going the direction we're going, it's a further merging of our biology with technology and a continued destruction of the natural environment because it's not necessary.
It doesn't have to go that way. It can be the merging with technology and have it be very spiritually, ethically, morally, philosophically grounded in interconnectedness with nature. It can be both.
It could, but I tend to agree with Tristan Harris's view of technology, which is that it's not neutral. It has an agenda that's built into it. And generally, the agenda of technology is not in alignment with the things that make people happy and feel meaningful and involved. I think technology generally favors the centralization and concentration of power and resources, which is what we're seeing, right? With greater income inequality and wealth inequality in the United States than has existed ever in the history of this country. The technology is not is not dispersing resources more equitably. Every time they sell it to us, they tell us that's what it's going to do, right? Airbnb is going to help everybody. Uber is going to help everybody. It's the sharing economy, but somehow the resources end up not being shared.
Well, that's the inclusive stakeholding solution that we were talking about earlier, literally, where the drivers get tokens, as well as the customers that take the car rides get tokens that then earn an inclusive stakeholding membership, ownership of the fruits that are being created by the gig economy. And that is a massive part to our future. And that same thing can be applied to teachers and their students. It can be applied to physicians and their patients, this inclusive stakeholding idea. And then it makes it so that at least the benefits of the big merging with technology are more interconnected with nature. We keep that, but also the fruits are shared with all people as best as possible. What are the other two potential options that you wrote about?
Well, one was sort of Mad Max post-apocalyptic, nightmare scenario where, global economic and ecological collapse, and we end up in some sort of, crazy, horrible period of, cannibalism and whatever else was in that movie. But the third, which is the one I really hope that we can achieve, it involves the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, the hero of the thousand faces. So what Joseph Campbell explained is that, the great mythologist, explained that every society around the world has essentially the same origin myth, which is a narrative of a young person going out and, think of the Odyssey, right? Having experiences, meeting strange characters, learning lessons, facing challenges, almost dying, etc., and then returning and bringing back the knowledge that has been received on that journey. I quote T.S. Eliot toward the end of the book. There's a great line from the Four Quartets where he wrote, "We shall not cease our explorations, and the end of all our exploring will be to return to where we began and know the place for the first time."
I love that one. Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
So beautiful.
Or the line from Whitman that I began with. I just happened upon it.
I'm glad you have both Whitman and Eliot in there. That's great. Yeah.
He says, "The friendly and flowing savage, who is he? Is he waiting for civilization or past it and mastering it?" Mm-hmm. Right? So there's this sense that as a species, it feels to me as if we've been on this journey, right? We left home when we developed when agriculture started. That's when we left home, the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. All these myths of the lost paradise are racial memories of the hunter-gatherer life, where the gods provided for us. Mm. They weren't angry, vengeful gods, this Old Testament God that you and I have grown up with. They were gods that were nourishing and friendly, and Mother Earth gave, right? Took care of us. It was then the angry father came on the scene, and thou shalt eat by the sweat of thy brow. Thou shalt give birth in pain and agony. All this like angry and difficult experience began with agriculture. The struggle began with agriculture. And this is where I disagree profoundly with Richard Dawkins and the Neo-Hobbesians, who claim that life before the state, before civilization, was a constant struggle. There's no evidence for this. Mm-hmm. No anthropologist has shown this. Mm-hmm. Hunter-gatherers work on average 20 hours a week. And what we're calling work, which they have no word for in their language, is hunting, fishing, and gathering food, things that we do on vacation, So there's no evidence that life was a struggle before agriculture. It certainly has been a struggle ever since.
Oh, when you can't find the next patch of food, it's there's.
You have to. There were difficulties. Yeah. There were brief periods of hunger. We can read the bones in archaeological digs that show that hunter-gatherer nutrition is much better than agriculturalists. They were bigger people. If you look at the bones just before and just after agriculture arose in different regions, you see universally indications of nutritional deficiencies in the agriculturalists, in their teeth, in their bones. You see evidence of prolonged famine. You don't see these things in the hunter-gatherers because they're eating 75 different types of plants and animals. They're not dependent on one. So if the crop fails, there's no problem for hunter-gatherers. They don't have a crop. It's the agriculturalists who are very dependent upon this. Anyway, the larger point I was making as far as the three scenarios is, yes, there's the continued merging of biology and technology, the sort of Elon Musk, we have to go to Mars scenario. There's the everything just falls apart and we're, revert to some sort of horrible, desperate struggle for survival scenario. The third scenario is that we're on this hero's journey as a species. We've gone out, we've learned very important things. We've learned birth control, which is very important.
I see. So it's like we heroes journeyed out into cities and metropolises.
Into this
and we're going to take what we learned from it.
And go home, right? Yeah. And it feels to me that we're at this point, we're at the most distant point now, and we as a species are turning toward home because we're realizing how precarious things are.
Yeah.
We're seeing how far from home we've gone and how much we're suffering. Now, of course, my perspective is very biased, right? But I see evidence of this all around. I'm at Whole Foods.
Mental health, suicide.
Oh, dude.
Cardiovascular disease, cancer.
Diabetes. Like, health-wise, we're a mess, right? There's no doubt. We're the richest country in the history of the world, and we're a mess. We're addiction, addictive behaviors, prison populations.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a disaster. Any way you look at it, and yet people, it seems to me,
but this equipment's pretty good to let us.
Oh, sure, it's great.
So there's there's always this interesting dichotomous struggle that happens between what we're saying, like that mental health and that this issue, but then it's like, but this equipment's enabling us to talk about it. So we can.
But we could have talked about it sitting around a fire. The equipment doesn't allow us to talk.
But this equipment enables it to be communicated. The memes can spread to millions of people around the planet that can then intake that into their worldview and go, fuck, I get that more.
I'm with you. I think podcasting is on a par with the invention of the printing press.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to balance these things out. So the idea is, how do we take the excellence?
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's why I think we're turning toward home.
Yeah.
Because here we are. We've got, for the first time, this interconnected global brain. So memes, ideas can spread in an hour. They can go everywhere, right? You and I assume there's no company between us and the audience, right?
Well, except YouTube and Facebook and all these other streaming platforms. So, and then there's some of the issues with censorship and stuff like that, demonetization. And so you have to get your own website and your own advertisers and stream directly to there just to make sure that you can retain your sovereignty.
Yeah, that's what I do. I'm even transferring off Patreon because I don't want to worry about that. But we have this opportunity. You and I can say anything we want, and nobody can stop us. There's no company between us and the audience.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. We can keep rolling. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
So what was I saying?
We're talking about taking
we're taking this knowledge that we've learned: passive energy, birth control, the understanding of what actually works for us, as opposed to what we're told should work for us, and we're taking that knowledge and heading back toward home. Whole Foods. Why is Whole Foods so successful? Because they don't use pesticides. Because it's healthy. Yeah, it's more expensive, but the idea, at least, is this is natural food. The whole natural movement, natural childbirth, paleo movement, paleo diet, intermittent fasting, Wim Hof, jumping in the cold water. Like all these things are where we came from.
Yeah.
Evolutionary medicine is a big deal now, right?
Yeah.
So I think that what's happening, the success of Sex at Dawn clearly was that it connected with a yearning that people had for, like, why isn't this working? Right? I love this person. Why am I bored? Why am I looking at other people? Right? And the resonance is, I'm looking at other people because that's the sort of animal I am.
I am.
Right?
I am an ape.
I am an ape.
Yeah.
We're all apes.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to do with Civilized to Death, was to take that, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, they're very similar in some ways. And what I wanted to do with Civilized to Death was take that same perspective and payoff and apply it to life in general, not just the sexual aspect of it.
Exactly, which I thought was so brilliant that you took that abstract leap to that field, because it actually puts you, I think, on par to be one of the more like world-leading intellectuals in the space of trying to get more people awakened to where our origins are and what we can learn from our origins as we move forward. And also, like you said, what we can learn from building the cities and metropolises, and also embed that as well into some of our older ideologies and try and move forward better. Like that's, again, this big thing that I think I'm taking away from where you're endeavoring into your next contributions to our world, that I think are actually, helping also awaken a lot of people to what are some of the most important conversations that we need to have.
I saw you had Andrew Yang on your show. I think universal basic income is a very hunter-gatherer principle.
Universal basic ownership or assets is the thing. Universal basic stakeholding is the idea.
It's very hunter-gatherer. Yeah. We're all in this together. We all take care of each other. And there's a great expression in Africa: the best place to store extra food is in your friend's stomach.
That's such a good one.
Right? I mean, you think about that, it makes sense. We survive by taking care of each other. That's basic to our identity as a species. And when we lose sight of that and we sort of externalize those functions, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Give me the good neighbor. I'll take the good neighbor over the insurance company any day.
Yeah. There's again, it's like, let's see if we can get this, like with this initial question of this, like, ultimate nature of reality that we were starting with. Whatever is macro to even the levels of microbiome here, human holding the microbiome, what is holding the womb of the human civilization, the planet, macro perspective there, what's happening at this ultimate nature of reality level. And also, like, our trajectory, where we came from, hunter-gatherers, what we can take from that process, what was actually really good there, those ideas there. What can we take that is good from the cities and from the metropolises that we live in? What can we do with with this evolutionary trajectory, bringing these things together to move forward in a way that's more optimal and in a way that understands the macro perspective of what is the purpose of this experience and where should we be going that is most optimal, that maximizes flourishing, that makes it so that more people can come and endeavor into consciousness and maximize their creativity and have meaning and have love and have that seems to be the function. And another part of it seems to be that you use science and you poke at the initial source code that we were created with, and then instead of thinking about things linearly, you think about them cyclically. And so we discover what the initial source code is, that evolved to complexity, and then we embed that initial source code in complexity and make another cycle. And this is kind of like an Ouroboros-y style of source or of creation that we're just embedded in. But we can decrease the amounts of suffering, we can increase the amounts of flourishing, and in order to do that, we have to look at our roots. We have to look at hunter-gatherers, and we also have to look at what has been good about the cities and metropolises that we live in today. And
we have to be honest about the fact that not all advancement is progress. That not all movement is movement in the direction we need to be going. And until we question some of the fundamentals, this faith-based belief in progress, then we're not able to think about what do we want to keep and what do we want to abandon, right? It's not just this sort of panicky insistence that we revere everything that we've done. Like, no, that's nonsense. We are capable of picking and choosing, right? In my opinion, solar, wind energy, great. great idea. Geothermal works beautifully. And nuclear, I don't see it.
Head to nuclear fusion, though.
Maybe, but do we need it? Because I think one of the shibboleths that we need to question is this idea that growth is necessary. We need to constantly be growing. Economies need to be growing. This is a very agricultural, post-agricultural view, because agricultural societies are in this ratcheting process that population keeps growing, so you need more land, you need more intense cultivation techniques, you need more food because the population keeps growing, and it just spins, right? Hunter-gatherer societies are sustainable. You have a steady population. It ebbs and flows with changes in the environment, the natural environment, and so it's sort of a steady state situation. I think one of the lessons that people are most resistant to, but that I think is most essential to the kind of world that you were just describing, is the realization that maybe 500 million people on this planet is the right number. That's
the Georgia Guidestones number.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I just pulled that up. I didn't know
500 million is the Georgia Guidestones number. 500 million people living harmoniously with nature.
Right.
That's
the
really
oceans recover. The stones, with that amount of people on the planet, we wouldn't probably be interfering with natural processes, right? So
we're heading there in some senses with the population stabilization. You can look at the canary in the coal mine in Japan.
Yeah, only in
developed places,
very developed countries.
Less religious and also less developed or more religious and less developed have more kids.
Right, and if those countries were living the way in terms of resource consumption, the way people in Spain and Japan were living, then the world would be pretty bad. So I think, that's why I look at universal basic income or some sort of, global security system, so that you disincentivize people from having lots of kids in order to have some security in old age. If they knew, I don't need to do that. We already know where women are allowed to be educated and have decision making, they have far fewer children. So if you had a universal movement in the direction of respect for women allowed to make their own reproductive choices, and incentives to not have kids. I'm not talking about eugenics. I'm not talking about killing anybody or any crazy stuff like that. I'm just saying make it beneficial for people to have fewer kids. Make it, I don't have kids. I talk about it all the time on my podcast. I love not having kids. I'm really glad. I love kids, other people's kids, and I wish I lived in a tribal situation where I could take care of those kids sometimes and let my friends go off and go to the movies and share that. Yeah. And in fact, I'm in the process of setting up a situation like that now.
That's really interesting. I want to know more about that. Can you give us any sneak peeks into that?
I'm not ready to say where it is yet because it's still very early. But I'm in the process. I bought land there, and my closest friends, I want to give them the opportunity to come and buy land and get in on this. And once they've decided what they want to do, then I'm going to talk about it publicly and let people who listen to my podcast or your podcast or whatever, if they're interested, come. It's a beautiful place. It's very cheap.
Yes.
Clean air, clean water, proximity of nature, big airport not too far away.
Yes.
And what we're basically, it's not a commune, right? It's everyone, you buy your own place, build your own house, but there's no building code, so you can live in a yurt, you can build a teepee, you can build a normal house, you can do straw bale, an earthship, whatever you want. And the idea is that we take care of each other.
Yeah.
That's it. So you have kids and you want to go to the city for the weekend? Sure, we'll watch your kids. You know, you want to take off and Airbnb your place? Fine, we'll be around. We'll do it. We'll watch your dogs. When we take off, you take care of it. It's very basic, you know.
We grow spinach, you grow apples.
That's it. We have friends who do chickens. So we have another friend who's an auto mechanic. He'll fix our cars, you know, whatever this might sound like communism to some people. It might sound like hippie, commune. I think these things work on small scales. They don't, anarchy doesn't scale. It works when there's reputational damage. It works when we all know each other. And if you act like an asshole, everybody knows, and somebody talks to you and says, hey, dude, that wasn't cool. And then, that's an organic way for us to interact as people. When you scale up to the level beyond Dunbar's number, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? When you get past that, other people become abstractions, reputational damage no longer functions, and you get someone who, rips people off.
Yeah, the self-dealing habits come. And this has actually been something we've talked about the show with Ari Nazem and a bunch of other young people that are also pushing into this field of creating communities of about 150 people each, and then having those communities be take some of these hunter-gatherer habits and communal habits into them, and then also interface with the growing tech world and interface with other communities in that sense. So,
and that's the thing where technology has been really helpful, right? Because more and more people don't need to be in a given place. They can work remotely. And so if you're making $100,000 a year, you want to live in Silicon Valley or you want to live in Idaho? Because in Idaho, you're rich. In Silicon Valley, you're poor, right? So the opportunity...
But in Silicon Valley, you're closer to the network effect, and so you're closer to people that are higher up on this intelligence fitness landscape. But then again, how often are you actually interfacing with them versus, they're not in your technical Dunbar number, maybe...
Right. And what are you aspiring to?
What are you aspiring to?
Do you want to be as rich as possible financially, or do you just want to be quality of life?
I think these are not mutually exclusive things in the sense that you can aspire to network with some of the smartest people in the world, and maybe you do find them in the Silicon Valley or London or whatever.
Dude, I'm questioning that premise.
I do too, in a sense. I've
been all over the world.
Yeah, you've been.
The smartest people I've met haven't been in Silicon Valley.
And your podcast guests are excellent. Your communications are excellent as well. And so I agree that like it's not like everyone that works at Google or Facebook is fucking brilliant, right? And actually a lot of the time we see that some of the smartest people that we've had the chance to sit down with, some of the most spiritually activated and actualized and interconnected with nature and most also interconnected with science and most entrepreneurial people are the ones that are off the grid, that are way less indoctrinated into the metropolises and that style of they're not people that are trying to like get rich. They're people that are trying to help awaken and like catalyze spiritual actualization and unity with nature and spreading that style of vibe around and asking some of these grand philosophical questions with our merging with AI and the technological singularity. So I think people like that are some of the smartest people, and sometimes they're found in Metropolis, sometimes they're not. But you mentioned this just a couple minutes ago, and I just want to illustrate it because I think it helps so much that if you believe that that when you look at hunter-gatherers compared to the metropolis to where we're at today, that if you look at that and you say that there's nothing good about hunter-gatherers and there's 100% good about metropolises and cities, you are sadly mistaken. We ask you to please reconsider that aspect of your worldview. Look back at hunter-gatherers, look back at their interconnectedness with nature, look back at their interconnectedness with each other and some of their best practices, and try and go back and fetch those best practices and embed them in what we have now today,
right?
And get rid of some of the cancerous aspects to our civilization today, include inclusive stakeholding, include the future of our social fabric that can maximize flourishing, and that can potentially look like some of these small interconnected communal situations that we're really excited for that, and hopefully we can revisit more conversations like this. I hope that, like I said, when you visit, or like we said, when you visit Shermer's podcast in the future, when he comes on yours, you're going on his.
I think I'm going on his next, yeah.
So when that happens, we did this the second time that we hosted Shermer on our show. We did our best to help zap a little bit of that hunter-gatherer nature spirit into him, and it actually did a good job. He resonated with it. So the more that we can do that, and the more that we can illustrate out, like here are ways that both Pinker or Shermer or Dawkins have great things that are being said, and also some of the good, Christopher Ryan things that are being said around hunter-gatherers, and Graham Hancock stuff can actually be embedded and intertwined together.
Sure. Yeah, the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right? And there's always, as long as you're coming into the conversation with respect for the research, for the data, and not imposing your worldview on it, I think it's always useful. My conversations with Michael Shermer have always been interesting and respectful. And
likewise. Totally likewise.
I think he's a legit dude. Yeah.
Two quick questions on the way out that we ask all of our guests. The first question is, do you think we're in a simulation?
I think we may be someone's dream. Does that count?
Yeah.
We may be in a dream.
Why do you think that?
Because I have seen, how when you're dreaming and maybe there's smoke nearby and you start dreaming of fire, you integrate this thing that's happening in the external world into your dream, or an alarm goes off and suddenly you're in school and the bell's ringing. Your dream incorporates these things. I've had experiences in my life that felt like they were incorporations of something that was happening in another dimension, and it was being incorporated into my consciousness here. I don't know if that is comprehensible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've had experiences that are inexplicable.
We still don't know what is going on with sleep. We know that we're clicking the save button. We know that it's really important for our biological physiology and stuff, but we don't know what's happening with the theory of parallel universes and the multiverses, and what's actually happening with where we're going, what's occurring.
We don't know why it's essential. Some animals sleep with half their brain, and there's also hypnosis we don't understand, placebo we don't. There's a lot of gravity we don't understand. I was talking with Joe, and he said he mentioned that to Neil, and Neil got really defensive. He's like, we can measure it. But the fact that you can measure something doesn't mean you understand it, right? It doesn't mean you understand how it works. Until the 1970s, no one understood how aspirin worked. And we could measure it. You take more aspirin, you feel less pain. Like, you can measure its effect. But that doesn't mean you understand the mechanism. It doesn't mean you understand what's going on. It just means you do this, that happens. Okay, fine. That's not understanding, And I think that a lot of our approach to understanding life is like that. It's like, well, you can measure it. That doesn't mean you understand it. One of my mentors is Stanley Krippner, who's spent his life studying parapsychology, and he's done all sorts of interesting research in dreams and myths and extra sensory perception and all this kind of stuff. So I've spent a lot of time talking with him about those things. But I've had experience. I spent my...
He'd be a great guest on the show.
He's well into his 80s.
He's in his 80s.
Yeah.
Where is he based?
Fairfax, up north of San Francisco.
Okay, cool. I'm going
to see him in a couple days.
Cool.
Yeah,
maybe it would be cool to maybe visit him on site, or if he's down in the area, we could maybe have him on.
Yeah, I love that. I took him down to Rogan, and
you did.
Yeah, he was on Rogan's show a couple years ago.
Cool. Yeah, that's great.
It was fun. He's an amazing dude. He hung out with, people I'm sure you're very interested in. He was the youngest of that crowd of Timothy Leary and Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts, and like he knew all these people.
Cool.
Yeah,
so cool.
Joseph Campbell.
He'd be a great person to amplify the messages more around the world of what he has.
He's really sweet dude too.
Yeah.
He's wonderful. Yeah, I'll put you in touch with him.
That's who we do.
But yeah, so I feel that this is a dream, and occasionally something from the other dimension pops in.
Yeah, like deja vus, all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question that we like to ask our guests is, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The world itself. There's a reason that nature touches us. There's a reason that, to me, a sunset, the waves rolling up on the beach, a woman's body, music, these things are all pieces of one thing. They're all the same. I was talking to an ethnomusicologist on my podcast, and he made the point that, someone asked me recently, what is he said it really interesting. It was like the delta. What's the greatest delta between your understanding of a thing and your appreciation of a thing? And I said music, because I don't understand music at all,
but I appreciate it so much.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I feel it so much.
Or reality, for that sense.
If you're going to go macro, you're everything, but that's not a good answer. But it's like in this ethnomusic.
There's a pretty big delta between how much we respect reality and how much we understand it. Like, we love reality from a lot of us, but we barely.
I don't know if I love reality.
Oh, come on, Chris.
There are aspects of reality I could do without, let me tell you.
Okay,
but I feel like, for me, a book like this it's a love letter to the natural world, because I feel like that's, every dog yearns for the days when he was a wolf.
Yes.
Every fish in an aquarium is yearning for the ocean. Like, there's a reason those things resonate with us. It's because that's where we came from. That's what created us. Yes. Right? If there's a God that created human beings, it was the African savannah 500,000 years ago, right? That was what made us. Yeah. And so there's a reason golf courses are so relaxing to our minds, because we look at that and we see the world we're meant to inhabit.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like,
that's why the top viewed channels right now this is what I've learned about China. Have you ever seen our Primitive Technologies YouTube channels? The ones where it's literally the videos of the guys that go out like hunter-gatherers and they build like houses and they make shoes and stuff like that out of all of the stuff that you find in the woods and like stuff like that. That's actually some of the most popular channels here, and it's apparently the most popular viewership in China.
Really?
So literally, civilization, as it's moving into metropolises and cities, misses hunter-gatherer society so much that it becomes the most popularly viewed things on the internet.
Right. But that's the tragedy, right? That we destroy the real thing, and then we sell with commercials and plastic packaging some cheap copy of that thing. That's what we do. We pollute the water, and then we sell bottled water. We pollute the air, and then we sell air filters for your bedroom. This is the trajectory of civilization that I'm hoping we're turning away from, and we're saying, wait a minute, instead of creating air filters.
A boomerang.
Yeah.
Like, we throw out into cities and metropolises, gather what we learned from that experience, and we come back to nature and the interconnectedness.
Right. Exactly. I hope that's where we're going. It's better than that Mad Max thing.
Chris, this has been so fun, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to.
So freaking enlightening. Really appreciate you coming on, and congratulations on all the incredible work that you've done with Sex at Dawn, with Civilized to Death, Everyone, highly recommend checking out all the links in the bio below. ChrisRyanPhD.com is the website. Also, Civilized to Death, the book link is in the bio below. Check that out. Sex at Dawn, also the book link is in the bio below.
I read the audiobook too.
Yeah.
So if my voice doesn't annoy you and you want an audiobook, there you go.
Hit that audiobook as well. You guys know we definitely are big fans of audiobooks. Definitely, that's a great point. You narrated it, which is great. Also, check out his Twitter, his Instagram, and Facebook as well. Follow along the journey. Again, the podcast is called Tangentially Speaking. They've had over 400 episodes. Check that out. It's done from his van.
Well, sometimes.
Sometimes from the van.
Yeah.
The Vanthropology, as Chris is doing. I love that. Scarlett Johansson is such a funny name. Love that. Check all of that out, everyone. Have more conversations with your friends, families, coworkers, people online about the concepts that we talked about in the show, about what aspects of progress may actually be analogous to disease, and about how we can then, like a boomerang, start with this nature and interconnectivity, go out, find what was good in the cities and metropolises, bring it back to this nature and interconnectedness. I love this conversation so much again. For all of those listening and checking this out, we would love for you to support the artists, the entrepreneurs, the leaders in your communities that you believe in, support them and help them grow. Support Simulation, our show. All of our links are below to our PayPal, Patreon, cryptocurrency. You can find all those links below. Support us. And also, that's it, everyone. Build the future. Manifest your dreams into the world. We love you very much. Thank you for tuning in.